ban C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, Orwell, Huxley, all kinds of works, and how that ties into plans that the technocrats said they would do 100 years ago. So we know if we look at books that H.G. Wells wrote, that Bertrand Russell wrote, I'm going to look at some of these books here in a minute, we're going to see that they actually said 100 plus years ago that, or almost 100 years ago, that it would be necessary in the technocratic dictatorship to roll out the banning of classical literature, the banning of stories, adventure stories. Bertrand Russell even says you have to ban adventure stories because it might inspire young men to be adventurous, and the kind of person that they want, the slug who exists in a coon pod in the technocratic order, cannot have creativity, cannot be a wild man, cannot be a person who hunts, who fishes, or can run a trout line, to use the words of Hank Williams Jr. So we're going to look at that from the text, from Bertrand Russell himself, and we're going to look at some of the reasons why they would want to ban this, because this is actually a banning of the history of Western civilization, the history of our culture. They want to erase that in a Jacobin-style, Maoist, Pol Pot-style year zero, year one, reset everything. That's on purpose. And that's actually in the dystopian literature from decades ago. That's why it's so important to ban, especially in a few weeks, the call for the banning of C.S. Lewis, J.R. Tolkien, George Orwell, amongst other works tagged as triggers for far-right extremism by anti-terrorist groups. So they want to castigate literature now, classic literature, literature part of the Western canon, part of the standard fair education that we would all have in the West. Huxley as well, ironically, which is weird because Huxley wasn't even necessarily opposed to this system. He was part of that structure, but they included him amongst the list of those who are dangerous because the book reveals too much. We're talking, of course, about Brave New World there, 1984, Lord of the Rings, and I guess overall C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy, which is all about the technocratic New World Order. And even talks about aliens being demonic. I mean, it gets really deep. I mean, this is pretty wild, but it's nothing new. You might think that, well, but censorship is a McCarthy era thing, and it's when the system was persecuting us from all the Reds, and they wanted to get rid of the communist infiltration. And no, this is not. This is beyond that. This is the next level, and we're going to take a look at a book that was written by one of the persons involved in this inner clique, this inner circle of technocratic Fabian socialists who called for the banning of literature in the future when the technocratic control system was in place. And that's none other than Bertrand Russell in his famous book, The Scientific Outlook, which posits that scientism will be the religion of the future of the technocracy. Now, on page 157, he says, in the future, and he's describing this technocratic order that will come into place. He says that we won't have poverty because employment will not be uncertain. And the reason employment won't be uncertain is that everyone will be, from their youth, chosen and assigned certain professions. So you understand that you won't have this idea of becoming what you want, doing what you want. You will be chosen and assigned positions as you're needed in the control system. Now, again, he's not describing a system that will be in some way a utopia. He actually calls it a kind of a utopia, but he says it's a utopia, as Klaus says, where you won't own anything and you'll be drugged and you'll be happy. So that's the kind of, quote, utopia that we're talking about. He says that anyone who chooses not to work according to their assigned job will be put in prison. When owing to any circumstances, the work upon which a man has hitherto been employed is no longer required, he will be taught some kind of new work that fosters the system, and he will be adequately maintained while he is learning his new trade. Economic motives will be employed to regulate the entire population, which will be kept stationary. So we'll have zero population growth. We'll have a limited number of sustainable people. All of the extra people. If you've ever heard David Attenborough, he talks about the animals as they dilly-dally in the fields. And here we have the extra person, another animal that dilly-dallies in the field and must be gotten rid of. Yes, he actually used the phrase extra people quite often, because in the technocratic order, which David Attenborough was a member of, this Malthusian elite clique, he believed that there would not be any extra people because there would be a fixed number, the type of fixed numbers that all of the global technocratic elite talk about in their depopulated future. Now, Russell goes on to say, and by the way, I've got this whole page up. If you want to go to my Twitter, it got pretty good engagement. You can go to my Twitter, it's up at the top. I've got 3 selections that we're going to look at from Bertrand Russell and H.G. Wells about things that rolled out in the last few weeks. Interesting. Russell says, population as is kept stationary will be docile and happy because all that is tragic in human life will be eliminated. Even death will become seldom before old age because there won't be any adventures. There won't be any dangerous things that you engage in. Everything will be regulated by safety. So it's a nanny state. It's a state of the future based around security, based around comfort, ease, and satiation. Whether men will be happy in this paradise, I don't know. So he actually admits that you won't actually be happy, but Klaus tells you will be happy. But he says biochemistry will show us, however, how to make them happy. Now, this is the real planner of the future, one of many of the Royal Society and other groups. And this thing he's talking about here in this text is written into a fiction text called Brave New World. And this was written in 1932 by Huxley because he knew what these people were planning. So the fiction story is telling you what they're really planning. And Aldous Huxley wrote a book later on explaining that it wasn't fiction. So when he says that the drugs, the pharmaceuticals, the drugs in the food and the water will make everybody fat, dumb, and docile, he's talking about an actual plan that people like John P. Holdren talked about in books like Ecoscience, books like Ghost and the Machine by Arthur Kessler talked about drugging the food and the water supplies of the future in the technocratic order to drag the population down, to keep them dumb, keep them stupid. And Russell says right here, biochemistry will perhaps provide that opportunity for us, the elite. Perhaps dangerous sports will in fact be organized for those whose boredom would otherwise turn into anarchy. So with the danger of rebelling against the system, that can be counteracted, he's saying, by creating gladiatorial events. So bringing back bread and circuses. And here he's saying basically a Hunger Games style scenario where people really are crying out for something beyond their boring, satiated, drug, fat existence. We'll give them gladiatorial games. We'll give them the Hunger Games. And he says that Hunger Games, the big gladiatorial events, the Super Bowl, right? This will be a way to direct their energy away from actually taking action in a meaningful way to oppose the technocratic system. So while he's already mentioned prison labor camps, he's already mentioned mass drugging of the population, now he's mentioned economic controls, right? You will get basically, he says elsewhere in other books, you'll get a universal dole, a UBI. That's what the CBDC model is. Then he goes on to say that they won't even think about rebelling or opposing the system because sports will take over the cruelty which will have been banished from politics. Football will be replaced by play battles in the air, which death will be the penalty of defeat. So he's saying that we'll have a new Roman gladiatorial games, right? Like Gladiator or, Marcus Aurelius and Russell Crowe, right? We'll bring this back and that will satiate the masses when they have a desire for some kind of real bloodletting. It may be that as long as men are allowed to seek death, they will not mind having to seek it in a trivial cause. To fall through the air before 1 million spectators may come to be seen as a glorious death, even if it has no purpose but the amusement of a holiday crowd. Maybe that in some such way, safety valves can be provided for the anarchic, violent forces of human nature. Or again, it may be that wise education and a suitable diet may cure men from their unruly impulses. In other words, altering the food, the diet, to make them docile. Do you see that this is the foremost philosopher and logician of this last century? Now, I don't think he's that great, but what I'm saying is that this system touts Bertrand Russell as the greatest philosopher and logician of the last century. He was a member for a time of the Fabian Socialist Society. He was a member for a time in a lot of other elite circles and cliques. He was in certain, shall we say, polycule type situations. So he was an early promoter of the polyamorous lifestyle. And the reason for all that is that he says that it's necessary in the future to break down the family as well. So basically, you're getting everything that we're going into in this guy's writings. It's pretty wild that he wrote this book in the 1930s, right around the same 1931, 1 year before Brave New World came out. Then he says that when we made them dumb and docile and dead from food and diet and injunctions, he says that there will be a universal language, which will be either Esperanto or Pidgin. So this is the breakdown of the English language, the collapsing of it. Orwell wrote essays about the destruction of the language to make you unable to be nuanced, unable to make philosophical, logical, coherent argumentation sentences, unable to convey things in a clear, meaningful way, to dumb you down. The literature of the past will, for the most part, not be translated into this made-up, low IQ, dumb language, since its outlook and emotional background will be considered unsettling. That means you're not going to read Dostoevsky, you're not going to read the Bible, you're not going to read Shakespeare. In fact, he even says, now I said this for many years, and people thought I made this up. Where does Bertrand Russell say we can't read Shakespeare? Well, not that most people even care about reading Shakespeare anyway, but he says it right here. He says that in the technocratic order, when the language has been dumbed down, he says that students will need a government permit to read Hamlet or Othello. So he says it right there. I didn't make it up. So in other words, you're not going to read Hamlet. You're not going to read Shakespeare. You're not going to read Tolkien. You're not going to read Orwell. You're not going to read any of these books, C.S. Lewis, or the Bible. And that's why in Brave New World, Aldous Huxley has the main character, John the Savage, talking to the world socialist controller, Mustafa Mond, about this banning of Shakespeare in the Bible. And Mustafa Mond says that it's not for the masses. They don't deserve it. They don't read it. They don't care. They don't understand. They just want to be fat, dumb, and happy anyway. So why should we give them Hamlet, Othello, and the Bible? Now, speaking of Hamlet and Othello, if you go to the top of my Twitter there, you will notice that we're going to have a live event again in Hollywood. I want to remind you, with somebody intimately connected to Shakespeare, and that's, of course, Jamie Kennedy, who played in Romeo and Juliet. That was one of his first early big roles. Jamie Kennedy, of course, is the star of Scream, well-known, popular stand-up comedian. We had a great time with Jamie last, 8 months ago? Yeah, exactly, in Los Angeles. And so we're doing another event. This is totally different material, totally different content. We're doing a 5-hour event, geopolitics, conspiracy, religion, Hollywood. I'm going to be talking for a couple hours. Jamie's going to be talking, my wife, on Hollywood occultism. And then, of course, Jamie Kennedy doing a stand-up set. So you do want to read Shakespeare, then come get your Romeo and Juliet posters and CDs signed by Jamie Kennedy, who played, he was playing Leo's friend in Romeo and Juliet. But anyway, so Russell goes on to say that in general, the public will be forbidden access. You get those tickets, by the way, on my Twitter. Go to my Twitter, follow me on X. I'm linked right there. Just type in J Dyer, you'll see me there. And you can follow me there and get your tickets if you're in the California, Vegas area, March 15th, live in Hollywood. He says that the literature of the past has to be forbidden because it teaches young boys to be adventurous, right? It might glorify the notion of, he says, private murder. I think he's talking here about self-defense. So merely defending yourself, merely having skills, right? Like Napoleon Dynamite says, totally skill sets that are necessary, like nunchucks, right? Having nunchucks, having skills. You can't read books about having skills. Boys will not be allowed to read books about pirates or Indians. Love themes will be discouraged because you can't have pair bonded relationships. You got to have, I guess you got to have relationships with transvestites. I guess that's the only relationship in the future, right? And by the way, in Brave New World, you have to have sex when anyone demands it. So that's actually literally what he's talking about. if you believe in actual love and pair bonding, that is viewed as, quote, anarchic. It will be viewed as silly and wicked. So notice Bertrand Russell says that if you want to have a normal relationship with a wife and having children, that's going to be wicked. Love is silly, perhaps even wicked. If a scientific world is to survive, it is necessary that we make men, quote, tame, feminize men, emasculate men. That is absolutely necessary. And that's, of course, the point of another sci-fi story, Clockwork Orange, right, is to how to tame, emasculate, and domesticate men in the West. Then, when that's happened, it would be much easier to bring about the civilization-destroying technocratic control grid. So in other words, there's strategies, there's steps to getting to the end goal of the technocratic system. One of those steps is one of the steps that we're going through right now, which is the destruction of the existing order and the existing Western male, white, heterosexual Christian population. That is a stumbling block to bringing in this order. And in fact, people give John Coleman a lot of flack, but John Coleman actually said this a long time ago in his book, Committee of 300. Now, I don't think John Coleman got everything right. I think he got about 95% of his predictions correct. Some things I think he's off on, he got wrong. But Committee of 300 actually said that by the time that we're in now, 2020s, America would be absolutely overrun with illegals. So we can talk about how he got this or that wrong, but he sure did get a lot of things right. Now, if you scroll down on my Twitter, you'll notice there's another quote from another book by Bertrand Russell that is equally as important. And that's the book called Impact of Science on Society that Russell wrote a few years later in 1953. I have my dusty old copy that's basically completely disintegrated. There you can see in the back there the old evil turtle himself. He looks like an old turtle. He reminds me of the turtle in Neverending Story, right? He talks really slow. That's kind of what he looks like. Fabian socialist technocrat Lord Bertrand Russell in his 1953 book, The Impact of Science on Society, he talked about the social engineers of the future world government teaching the masses, get this, that snow is black and that they will believe it. Now, in my view, this is a perfect explanation as to why so many people are going insane. They don't know if they're a guy, they don't know if they're a girl, they don't know if they're in between, they don't know what they are. There's 60 million genders that you can identify as. Why is this? Well, it's not just because of people going crazy, people being, quote, liberal. It's actually a engineered control system, strategized and planned out 100 plus years ago. So notice on page 30 what he says, talking about the future world system, the future technocratic order. And he says, what will education be like? This subject will make great strides when it is taken up by scientists under a scientific dictatorship. Anaxagoras maintained that snow is black, but no one believes him. Social psychologists of the future will have a number of classes of school children on whom they will try different methods of producing an unshakable conviction that snow is black. Various results will be soon arrived at. First, that the influence of the home is obstructed. In other words, compulsory mandatory government education. No homeschooling, no Christian schools, no religious schools. You must be educated by a mandated socialist state system. Second, not much can be done unless the indoctrination begins before the age of 10. So get them young. It's exactly what's happening right now as they go after the most innocent, the most naive children under 10 to completely destroy them. Third, verses set to music, repeatedly intoned, are very effective. I wonder why the pop stars are so degenerate. Why do they talk about completely degenerate nonsense stuff? This is why. Fourth, that the opinion that snow is white must be held to show a morbid taste for eccentricity. So in other words, if you believe that breasts give breast milk for babies, why, you're a fringe eccentric. If you believe that women give birth to babies and men impregnate the women. Why, you're a weird eccentric. That's so fringe and crazy. Who ever thought of such a thing? But I anticipate it is for future scientists to make these maxims precise and to discover exactly how much it costs per head to make children believe that snow is black, or that boys are girls, or that girls are boys, or that you can become a girl or a boy, and how much less it would cost to make them believe that it is dark gray. So in other words, he's saying that they'll even have actuaries about how cost effective it is to engage in this total brainwashing in the state school system. Although this science will be diligently studied, it will be rigidly confined to the governing class. In other words, you as a common pleb, according to Bertrand Russell, will not know or understand that you've been brainwashed and mind controlled, that you were given a proletariat education, as Alex mentioned earlier in today's show. But the elite governing class, the technocratic class, the zillionaire class, they will be given a different education that you don't get. They will study the classics, as Bertrand Russell just said. They will read the Bible. They will read real philosophy. They will study Greek philosophy, the pre-Socratics, Plato, Aristotle, the very things that Russell's talking about. Anaxagoras is a pre-Socratic. But you won't be given this education. You'll be given what? Common Core, right? That's for the plebs to control you. And he even says it's to control you. When this technique is perfected, every government that has been in charge of education for a generation will be able to control its subjects securely without the need of any armies, or policemen. In other words, we don't need standing armies when everybody's turned into a happy, dumb, docile, complicit slave. And that's why it's so necessary to do everything that they're doing in terms of toxic food, toxic culture, toxic education, toxic media, to make you feminized, afraid, to make you soy men, to make you give up your masculinity, to make you not have offspring, to make you not find a woman or a man. Everything that's churned out is for this plan. And this book right here alone should tell you and prove to you that this is not a theory. It's not a conspiracy fringe idea. It's absolutely 100% documented. I've lectured through almost 60, 70 of these books now on this very topic that talk about this in great detail. In fact, I just put up on my Twitter a list of about 50 books. When somebody says, there's no such thing as a conspiracy, I don't believe in conspiracies, you're making this stuff up, I listed for you about 40 or 50 books from the system, from the establishment, that has thousands of tweets, retweets, whatever, telling you and showing you what I'm talking about. So you'll be so docile, he says, that they won't even need an army to control you. And lastly, if you look down below that, there is another post of the 1940 godfather of modern propaganda, H.G. Wells, in his 1940 book called The New World Order. He conveniently names the books for you so that you could go read them and figure out, I wonder if there's a plan for something like a New World Order. Well, they write books about it, but I guess we're still supposed to believe it doesn't exist, even though if you deny it exists, you're a bigot because it's a good thing. Page 104, the global technocratic state will arrive slowly by incrementalism. That's the Fabian plan, the slow kill plan. And we arranged around the idea of a single collective man with a capital M, to replace God with a capital G. You won't have individual rights. You won't have creativity. You won't have the ability to be proud of your achievements because everything will be transferred over to the collective world state. There will be no day of days when a new world order comes into being. Step by step, right? Here and there it will arrive. Even as it comes into being, it will develop fresh perspectives, discover unsuspected problems, and go into new adventures. No man or no group of men will ever be singled out as the father or the founder, for its maker will not be man, this man, that man, or any man, but, quote, man, the collective man. The being who, in some measure, is every one of us. The New World Order will be, like science and like most inventions, a social product. Actually, this guy actually believes that people invent things socially. Complete nonsense. social products, an innumerable number of personalities who will have lived fine lives, and they will pour their best achievements into the collective achievement. So here he is, H.G. Wells, telling you the father of modern propaganda, who wrote two books. He wrote many, many books, but two books specifically on the notion of the coming technocratic world order that actually tells you and shows you everything that we're talking about today. So here are the architects of the world that we're going into, telling you that it's a plan, telling you in your face that you're too dumb to know it or to understand it or to rebel against it, and that all your literature and all your history needs to be wiped out and banned in a year zero Maoist Jacobin-style purge. If you want to support my work, you can go to my website, jaysanalysis.com, and get the books in the shop, signed copies, my big fat red book, 660 pages of